Michael,
The brie with the rosé gets completely lost.
No,
Right.
I went back and tried the brie with the
this
rosé.
is oh,
Yeah.
this-
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Michael, you had said that you could actually age the rosé. What's the max length, or what's the suggested length, I should say?
I suggested on this one is maybe 3 to 4 years. I think would be fine. But I've had some rosés 10 years, or depends on where they are, how they're structured, what kind of acidity they have. So it's it's kind of, and also depends what kind of style that you prefer. But for me, I would say 3 to 4 years, and this would still be a really nice rosé.
And on the Viognier, have you always is this the first time you've blended the two grapes, or is this just something unique for this vintage?
No, I always have been blending the two different vineyard sites of Viognier, because they're distinctive, and though I like them both, I don't really like either one on its own. So I like that. For me, the luxury of having a vineyard in Roanoke that's elevated, different style, and a vineyard hot site in Gordonsville is two completely different style of Viognier. So it's actually, I'm lucky to have access to both places and be able to kind of create the style every year that is the best representation of that vintage. So some years it's more of one and less of the other. It really changes on how the vintage comes in. But for me, it's great to have the different sites to play with. Really lucky.
And this particular 2017 Viognier won the Gold Cup, so you need to say that.
Oh no! Did it win? I don't know if it won. You got a gold medal.
Did it win? I did. Well, maybe I'm wrong. It's a great thing. I have a case of it in the house, so there you go.
Yeah. No, it was 17 was a fantastic vintage. It was really a great vintage here in Virginia, across the board on all the varieties, and it really 17 really was besides, and 19 was fantastic, but 17 I think really overall would be one of the best vintages in the past 10 years for us.
A question on the blending. You said you've used different percentages of the two grapes. How do you determine the percentage of each one to use? Do you actually taste the juice of each grape individually per harvest and then determine what it is?
Well, the blending isn't done until later, after the fermentation is completed, December, January, in that time frame. And so they're fermented separately in two different tanks of Viognier. And then I will start doing trials based on what I've tasted separately, kind of come up with an idea of what I'd like to see, and then keep fine tuning, maybe 65% one, 35 another, then maybe I'll go 60-40. I keep tasting until I find that right pairing between the two tanks. Sometimes it might be 90% of one and 10% of the other. So there's no recipe. It really depends on the vintage, and all that happens after the wine's finished fermenting, and we kind of have a clearer picture of what it's presenting.
Wow, great. Thank you. Very interesting.
Sure. All right, any other questions, or should we move on?
All right, we're gonna move on. So the third cheese, I'm really, really excited about this one. This is the Flores Truckle, cheddar from Missouri and Iowa. The Flore family is in Missouri, but the cheese is aged at Milton Creamery in Iowa. So for those of you who don't know, cloth-bound cheddar, it's a very cool thing. You make the cheese, pressed curd cheese, and you leave it in its cloth, in its cheesecloth. So typically when you make cheese, you put it in a cheesecloth and then in some sort of straining vessel. So this cheese is left in its cheesecloth for 10 days, and then they take lard. They take lard and they rub it all over the cheese to kind of seal in the flavor and protect it while it ages. So cloth-bound cheddar is an old world style from England. So this method is did. Farm does this. This is a cheese, like we said, from the Midwest, also doing the same system. So after 10 days, it's wrapped in lard, and then this is aged for an entire year. So we paired this with the Morgon because it should bring out the really peppery peppery notes of the wine and some of the tannins. This cheese is going to have a lot of notes of hay, of rich flavors, because this is coated in lard, because it's aged for a year. So all that should really come through and then bring out this kind of, like I said, peppery aromas. So take a look. It should crumble kind of naturally because of the way it's aged and because of its age. It's normal if it falls apart. So feel free on a cheese board. I don't know if you can see mine, to kind of crumble the cheese and have it in little bits. I say to serve it a bit different than the other cheeses that hold themselves together. So give it a taste, give it a smell, look at it. It should be a nice kind of golden color. So like I said, this one I wouldn't necessarily eat the rind. It's been wrapped in cloth and then rubbed with fat. So I guess you could, but I would maybe this one not so much eat the rind and just enjoy the cheese inside. So give it a taste. Good.
Okay, should we talk about the wine?
Just eat more cheese.
Keep eating cheese, yeah.
You can eat cheese while you talk about the wine.
So we decided to highlight the Morgon under our second label. This is not from grapes that we actually grow, so that's why we have the Maison Charmilly label. But if everyone's familiar with the Cru Beaujolais, the village of Morgon is probably one of the most famous of the Cru Beaujolais villages, and it's most known because it has a little bit bigger structure, a little more tannin than some of the other villages from very heavy limestone soils. These Gamay, it's all 100% Gamay, but it has more of a Pinot Noir style to it than some of the other Cru Beaujolais villages, I believe. This style, we're trying to make something. It doesn't get aged in any new oak. It's mostly actually stainless steel and some older barrels, but it's designed to be about the fruit, some of the tannic structure, but something that's can age. But the style that I like is something that's that's approachable young, and that you can really get into it. The meatiness, the fruitiness of it at an early point, though it has some pretty good structure to it for Gamay. What I always find that I like most about the Morgon, besides the tannic structure, is the kind of blackberry notes. It's a combination, for me, Morgon is a combination of dark, more acidic red fruits, but also has like a gaminess to it as well, almost like a game meat kind of characteristic that I get out of it as well. So the combination, it makes it a really interesting, blend of flavors. And Gamay, as we notice, has a little bit higher, brighter acidity. And so it really, I think with the cheese, really holds up well. And the textures match again. I think the textures are ideal for the pairing. So. And
I think we're trying to pull out that gaminess. We're trying to identify that gaminess and pull it out of the cheese. Again, with these two, you could even, incorporate saucisson with that meaty gaminess. It would kind of be like a nice, well-rounded meat, cheese, and wine experience. So that's kind of what we were thinking about when we did this one.
And the Morgon is a great summer red. You can even put a little bit of a chill on this one, put in the fridge for 20 minutes, grilled meats, and obviously with the cheese as well. But for me, it's great summer red. You can have with a lot of different, cuisine.
And that's also why we picked it, because this is a summer geared kind of cheese board. So we wanted to showcase different wines and cheeses that you could really entertain in the summer, this year, a couple more weeks, or, in the future, in the warmer months.
Any questions, comments? How does everyone think this is a good pairing? I hope.
Actually, I wanted to apologize. We're drinking out of one of your fellow vineyards wine glasses here. I apologize for that.
That's okay. It doesn't matter.
That's what's inside. That's what's inside matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Hannah, if you didn't, I apologize if we didn't hear it before, but there's a grittiness to the cheese. What is that grit? And it seems to just dissipate once you start chewing it.
Is it like a saltiness or like a crumbliness that you're experiencing?
It's salty, but I mean, it's just a crunchiness to it, a grittiness kind of but like I said, once you start chewing it, it kind of immediately dissipates. It's not like you're sitting there chewing sand or something.
I really think that's the protein coming through. So it's something called casein or tyrosine. It's actually the protein in the milk that as the cheese ages, it loses some of its moisture. And what it leaves behind is little flecks of protein, which kind of tastes like salt. So that really creates a texture and a nuttiness. If you look at a really old Gouda or a really old Comté cheese, which you also might taste in one of these, you'll see like tiny little white spots. And that's really, it's protein. It's protein left over from the milk, from, you know, the very basic part of the milk. It's protein at its base. So it's the protein that's left over after the cheese ages. So the cheese, like it might start, that cheese, for example, might start this big. I can't really see, but as it ages, it becomes smaller and tighter and it loses a lot of moisture. Milk is a high percentage of just moisture. It's water, it's liquid, it's part of the biology of the cow. So as it ages, the cheese becomes tight and it really leaves behind little protein crystals. And because this cheese is wrapped in its cloth and aged so tightly, it really kind of crumbles on the inside and is different than something that could really breathe and let air pass through and become more even and smooth, like an aged Swiss cheese or Gruyere. It's very smooth paste. This cheese is crumbly, it's nutty, and will have that texture due to the way it's aged, due to its form. So a truckle is actually the Old English word for the cylindrical shape of a cheddar. So they've kind of done this cheese in that shape as a testament to that, instead of in a big square block like a lot of American cheddars. They've kept its original form, its round circular shape, to kind of age it really nicely and bring out those notes that you're tasting, that texture.
And just a follow-up, earlier you talked about storing the cheese with cheese paper or wrap. Do you recommend that? I mean, we buy cheese from Wegmans all the time.
Yeah.
So do you recommend actually wrapping it in the paper and then putting it in a baggie, even like the Wegmans cheese or something like that?
Yeah, Wegmans has fantastic cheeses. I was, able to work there and try so many cheeses. But they do, since it's a grocery store, they do pack a lot of cheese pre-packed. They pre-wrap it in a special plastic that's actually been created for cheese. But the plastic suffocates the cheese after a certain amount of time. So I recommend when you do get home to take wax paper or parchment paper, something that has a little bit more breathability and that won't impart, a plastic taste. Wrap your cheese in that and store it in a container where there's a little bit of air, not airtight, but a Tupperware where there's air, or a Ziploc where you've let, some air remain in the bag. Just because cheese is living, it'll continue to develop, to process, to kind of continue to age. So you don't want to stop that aging. You want to just kind of protect it and let it continue. And cheeses like this one or the last one, you may see come kind of like greenish, bluish things, growing perhaps. But it's totally fine to trim it off and eat the cheese. It's not anything that's scary. It's not like when you have a loaf of bread and it turns blue, you probably shouldn't eat it. But cheese, it's okay to just trim it off, use like a planer or just a knife, and then, eat it. It's really just part of the natural process of the cheese. And like I said, cheese is mold, and mold isn't that scary. But definitely wrap it in something that it can breathe. There are companies that sell special cheese paper. So if you really want to get into cheese aging, it could be something to, invest in. But I think a simple wax paper, butcher paper is perfectly fine.